I love the Underground Railroad. What a beautiful, brutal, and essential story. What I'm going to do here is detail the story thread that stuck out most to me. I'm not meaning to impress upon you the way to read the show. Out of a sense of awe, I feel overwhelmed by the branches of thought that derive from the railroad metaphor. I do understand in the plainest sense that it represents the network of safe houses and escape routes for slaves, but the thematic emphasis the story imprints through a litany of characters, all expertly played, even the characters who are only there for 20 minutes, is made possible by such a strong shadow-side metaphor. And if you watch/listen/read any Barry Jenkins interview about the project, you can hear about the pervasive idea of collective parenting. He talks beautifully on it. So go seek those out for that point. But here, I'm going to talk about the tapestry of relationships to escape the story showcases. The idea is that escape is not enough. Now, I understand that in reference to torture, subjugation, and trauma caused by slavery, that may seem like an obvious point, and I acknowledge as a white person that I'll never come close to understanding the horrors and reality of it, and I wish to stress that this point I'm making is not in reference to a judgment on any of the main characters in the story. I think I mean it more broadly as kind of a point for all of us who are watching it in modern day. So just follow me on this point. In the story, as in modern day, I see that living with the knowledge of an atrocity in our past is not as simple as saying that's fucked up and moving on. The Underground Railroad so successfully shows us at every turn, makes us live with, spend time with, an individual's way of living with horror. Okay, now I'm going to get into ways of escape, all the different themes the story presents on the subject of escape. There's going to be spoilers in here, so watch it. Okay, first off, episode 1. Caesar and Cora, played by Aaron Pierre and Tuso Mbedu, escape the plantation in Georgia out of a life and death will in a harrowing episode with images that are hard to get out of your mind. By running faithfully away from a life of cotton, blood, and fire, the initial escape is all their own, but ultimately only achieved by violence. By Cora killing a man in defense, and as quickly as getting any distance from being a slave, they are born criminals. That's the story's first escape, the most cut-to-the-bone, raw, brutal, horrific kind of showing of it, but our entry into the story. Moving along to episode 2, in South Carolina, everyone in the village, white or black, escapes this atrocity through brainwashing, achieved mostly through material indoctrination. The clothes are nice, the jobs are a little less obviously horrible, though still horrible, and the black people are free to walk everywhere they'd like within town limits. But it doesn't take long to realize South Carolina was just using different means to bypass fundamental rights. South Carolina represents a falsity of cumulative material thinking. Next chapter in episode 3, in North Carolina, where black people were outlawed, Cora hides in the attic of a secret abolitionist, escaping through secret and physically lifeless compartmentalization. We spend the episode surveying this abolitionist as he lives amongst a village full of people who burn books. It's lifeless, it's dead, it's hard. The episode is tonally barren, and inevitably the shit rises to the top, intensely, as stuffy compartmentalizing can only oxidize. In episode 4, we take a step back from the forward-moving narrative and we check in with the young version of Ridgway, our villain, the Javert-esque lawman hunting Cora, played masterfully by Joel Edgerton. And he's an incredibly complex character, and I don't think it's undermining that complexity to say that he essentially escapes a lifelong anger-tinged void that couldn't be filled by God by punching down, because there's value in that for him. For the economy that he escaped into had a perverse economic and social value in that. So, long story short, to me, he essentially escapes his personhood to find value. So by this point, you're probably seeing my point a little bit clearer about the variety of ways that everyone in this story seems to be escaping basically the cultural identity of the country that they live in, because it's not working, it's not livable, so it needs to be adapted into something else. Then we move to Tennessee, and in Tennessee, Cora is taken across the Firelands with a slave named Jasper. Now, Jasper's a really interesting character. In Jasper, we see a man escaping reality itself to retreat inward. He chooses not to eat or speak. The power Ridgway yields over him doesn't work simply because he doesn't pay it any attention, and I acknowledge that as strength. But nevertheless, we have to watch him slowly wither away. Also in Tennessee, Cora attempts to kill herself, to escape from life itself. While this is an impossible topic, story-wise, her attempt and subsequent thwarting rescue by Ridgway, whose destiny is intertwined with Cora at this point, reads as a denial of a brutalist but individual way out of this life. Now, I wish to take an extra moment to stress the real-world importance of anti-suicide resources. I want to acknowledge, story-wise, the heavy burden of this type of escape, but also the real-life reality that this is an epidemic that's ongoing and heartbreaking. So, just wanted to acknowledge both realities there. Back to Ridgway for a second. It's worth noting that in Tennessee, he is thematically, story-wise, denied escape by the story at the moment that the tables are turned, but goes on to walk further down the path, essentially due to an oversight, as his thematic captor is defeated by a loyalty that he couldn't see. A literalization of the small ways power has always had more chances to fail. I do not presume to know if that was the author's intent, but I think that it applies. Then Cora makes her way to Indiana, and we follow her as she finds herself in a small community of economically liberated black people. This, to me, spoke to a broader kind of escape for people of color within our system, economically. It's a story old and new, a trade of a blind eye in return for a product gleaned from the fruits of a land a community sits on. Royal, played by William Jackson Harper, and his community keep their slice of life because of the wine they provide for the men in power. This feels very modern to me. I'm not shitting on economic viability, but hiding behind economic benefit is a racism smokescreen we've all been a part of, in ways obvious and overlooked. And eventually the explosion of violence at the end of episode 9 comes to be out of a belief that this economic agreement could work without a blind eye, an unfortunate symptom of optimistic minds vying for a better way. And finally we reach our finale. We go all the way back in time to check in with Cora's mom, who invisibly propels the whole story forward because of the myth that she got away and left Cora behind. It's kind of one of the central mysteries that's never seen and always lingering. Her story being the last chapter of this series drives the idea home for me. In short, she doesn't leave Cora behind. In fact, just when you think she's going to, she can't find it within herself to go through with it and turns back. That's when quickly, as if in direct thematic response to her choice, she dies quietly of a snakebite, senselessly taken before her intentions could be seen, thus creating the myth of escape, or this myth of escape. To wrap up, I feel it's human nature to want to distance oneself from horror. But that distance isn't real. It's a myth. A routine to make ourselves feel better. There's no escaping our past, and it's our past. There's blood in the ground. I'm grateful to this show, its creators, and the original author of the story for providing a safe way to see things as they are, as great fiction has the power to do. Because without awareness, there's no healing.